The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual co-hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position of the Firearms Radio Network and or their employers. Viewer discretion is advised. This is especially true on live shows.
There are parent groups in the area that say, well, how do we do something about this?
We just hand guns to little old lady teachers and we just say, go on. And
how often do guns fail?
I've done a lot of cool things professionally. I've never done anything that's this important.
This is the After Action Project, and we're bringing you the student's perspective on firearms training. This is the podcast that takes you inside the eyes of the student and the mind of the instructor, from practical to tactical, medical to legal, and everything in between. If there's a course for it, this is your fly-on-the-wall After Action destination. This is the After Action Project.
And tonight we're going to be talking about the FASTER program out of Colorado Springs and in Colorado. And if you guys aren't familiar with that, we'll have Laura go into a little bit more detail in just a moment. But they train teachers and faculty members, school administrators, how to defend themselves inside of the school. And oftentimes that training does involve firearms. So Laura, tell us a little bit about yourself and, try to do a better job explaining what FASTER is than brief description.
Sure. Yeah, sure thing. So you've got it right. FASTER is a training curriculum for teachers and other school staffers who are armed first responders on their campus. And we do think of them as first responders because if, God forbid, the worst happens on campus, the police are never going to be the first responders. The teachers are always the first responders. So there are, here in Colorado, there are approximately 30 school districts that have authorized armed staff. And that's our legal process to armed staff, is the school board has to authorize them. And so 30 school districts out of 180 or so in Colorado. And we're in business just to train them. They do all of that other stuff, all the authorization at their school, and we want to make sure that they have access to life-saving training. And our instructors are all active duty law enforcement with training in their background. They all have SWAT, either currently or prior. These are absolutely the right kind of folks to be training armed school staff to protect kids.
You said you guys handle the training aspect of it. What goes into getting the school boards to approve teachers actually being armed on campus? And how difficult has that been? You guys are in 30 out of 180. That's awesome. So is it starting to become a little bit easier getting into those school districts?
Yeah, so it's been legal in Colorado for 15 years for school boards to do this. Most of the 30 started after Sandy Hook, and then after Parkland, it really picked up. And so what I've been very busy with since Parkland is not just the training, but meeting with school boards all over the state, because they're all in very different places with this. Some say, we want to have a big, long public process and have lots of members of the community come in. And some school boards say, we're just going to go into executive session and pass this resolution. So it's really, really individualized. There are absolutely some school districts where the school board says, we are never, ever going to do this. And when that happens, there are parent groups in the area that say, well, how do we do something about this? So then I help them with, how do you recruit school board candidates who will at least consider this policy, as opposed to people who won't even talk about it. So there's lots of different iterations of that.
Have you ever had to walk into one of these schools that pretty much, as you said, just kind of never evers? How difficult is that to sit in front of some of those board members that are just totally anti-gun?
Yeah, so I haven't been to a school district that the whole school district is never ever, because since it's mostly just me doing all of this, I don't have time to go to places I'm not wanted, if that makes sense. So I'm at least going as part of an invitation. But I do have a lot of times that the folks that invited me are maybe just a portion of the school board, and there are other school board members or administrators who want nothing to do with it. And what's interesting is how non-political this seems, and for normal people like parents, and it really feels political just with the school board. So parents want their kids returned home alive every single day, not just most days, but every day. So they don't look at this as political. So it is pretty interesting to have those conversations. I mean, I talked to them about just the math of these things are over in 3 to 5 minutes. When is a cop going to get there? And we have something too here in Colorado called the Claire Davis Act, and it's named after the young lady who died tragically in the Arapahoe high school shooting. And her parents couldn't get any information out of the school afterwards on what they did to safeguard their kid. And so now there is a kind of a burden on schools to make sure, and there's words like reasonable, taking reasonable care to make sure that people are safe. That hasn't been challenged in court yet, but schools are starting to think about this. What does the Claire Davis Act indicate that I have to do as a school administrator or school board to make sure people are safe? So I have those kind of conversations about it, and trying to get everybody to the same goal. We want nobody dying as opposed to somebody dying or lots of people dying. So let's all agree that that's our goal and then figure it out from there.
So what does that training look like? Is there a minimum set of hours that the teachers have to go through per Colorado law? And then what does your class look like?
Yeah. And so it's interesting. The Denver Post recently did an article on our class. They came to one of our classes this summer, and their title was 30 school districts have armed teachers and there's no legal standard for training. Okay. That doesn't mean that there's no standard for training. So here in Colorado, there's an insurance company that insures about 90% of the school districts in Colorado. And it's not a big deal to them when a school authorizes armed staff. They sort of hand them a brochure. And so I actually bring those with me when I speak publicly to answer this question. They require 24 hours of training, and it has to fit into certain buckets like live fire and simulated scenarios and so forth. And then and then it has requirements for what's your ongoing training, your annual recertification, all that stuff. Even though that's not baked into Colorado statutes, that is very similar to what's done in other states where there is a statute. So it's common practice, but because the Denver Post, not the most pro-gun of outlets here in Colorado, because they did that, titled their article that way, I think that there's probably going to be somebody in this upcoming legislative session in January that tries to mandate that and butt their nose into what's actually going just fine. So anyway, 24 hours is what this big insurance company says in Colorado. Our class is about 28 hours. We add medical training, which is just as important, because if God forbid somebody's shot, we got to keep people alive till paramedics get there. So that's really important. We also added night shooting. Our lead instructor said, look, they've got football games. They've got late night parent teacher conferences that, it gets dark at 4:30 in the winter. They have to understand low light and flashlight techniques. So we added that too. So we have a late night for that. So it's mindset, it's medical, it's firearms training, including scenarios. And then at the end of it, they pass the post qualification, which is peace officer standards and training. It's the same thing that cops pass when they get out of the academy. We actually add 2 shots to the Colorado Post, and then we make them pass that +2 at 100%. So it gives the community a good comfort level that if you've passed this class, that you've got some skills and you've qualified at a pretty high level, and not everybody passes, and we're okay with that.
So I hear on the news all the time that we just hand guns to little old lady teachers and we just say, go on and go defend the classroom, right? I thought that's the way it worked.
Yeah. It's interesting that the term you hear is arming teachers, like the act of arming. And it's not like I am pulling up to schools with wheelbarrows full of guns and saying, come and get them. And it's not even like when a school authorizes staff that they say, everybody gets to carry. It's not that way at all. They say, we're going to have an armed staff program. And then they name individuals who are all volunteers. But I think when, especially in the national media, when they say arming teachers. I think they say that on purpose because they want us to think about that, little old lady teacher almost retired, or on the other side of the career curve, that little 22-year-old, 100 pounds soaking wet, scared of guns. They want us to think about both of those people. And by the way, I've had both of them in class, and I would trust them to protect my grandson. They're awesome because they have this mindset like we all have, that we have chosen a firearm to defend ourselves and our families if need be. And right now, these are folks who are disarmed when they go to work. They carry everywhere else. So you're right. It's not like we are passing out firearms. These are people who are already concealed carry holders, and they're just disarmed right now when they go to work.
Yeah. So one more thing, and I'll turn it over to Jeremy. And I think that's an important thing. Jeremy and I, as instructors too, we've taught everybody from the guy that's about to turn 21 in 2 weeks. Literally, we just had somebody like that, to a lady who was 75 years old, just had a stroke 2 weeks prior, just got out of the hospital and came out and qualified with her 1911 and shot well. So I'd like you to dispel any of those myths that we hear commonly on the media throughout this conversation. Bring those in, because I think it's important that we have that good education, that the people that watch this show that actually can utilize that stuff when they hear these things. And a lot of times that's where we get our information from, people like yourselves that really understand the details of all the little intertwinings going on with our politics and the way the media generally likes to twist things. But before we go any further, I want you to answer one more question on the insurance deal. And I'm just curious on it. And you don't have to say the company if you don't want. So this insurance company that's insuring schools, is it a nationwide company? Is it somebody well-known? Is it like a locked-in or something like that? Or is it just depending state by state basis?
Yeah, and across the country, it looks different everywhere throughout the country. Here in Colorado, the one I'm talking about, I'm going to mess up their name, but it's called something like Colorado District Insurance Pool, something like that. They're a municipal insurance pool for schools. And like I say, 90-some% of the schools get their insurance there. In Ohio, where Faster came from, and if you haven't had those folks on your show yet, they're amazing. They just they're in their 6th training year, and they're the ones who helped me bring Faster out here to Colorado. They have a different situation where they have more insurance companies, and so they've got some that are very supportive, some that aren't, some that decrease in premiums, some that increase premiums. And so they've got a lot of different experience there. But what I tell schools is, wherever I'm talking to them, if they are concerned about insurance premiums, or if their insurance company says they'll lose their policy, go shop. There are insurance companies out there that not only support the policy of armed staff, but it's a normal course of business for them, like it is for our district insurance pool here.
What are the prerequisites? You mentioned that, some of the fears that people have, the misguided fears, are that it's just going to be anybody, right? It's going to be the 90-year-old teacher, the librarian. So what, and you mentioned that they have to be concealed. They have to be currently, or have their current concealed carry license. So what are some of the other prerequisites that y'all are looking for?
Yeah, so concealed carry permit, not necessarily necessary to come to class legally, but they have to have it to carry at school. So we make it a prerequisite for class. Authorization by their school board or in process of authorization. What's interesting here in Colorado, probably similar to many of the states, is you've got here in Colorado, the edges of the square state are very rural, and those are the early adopters. So you've got some folks who've just carried a gun forever on their ranch or on their farm and never got their concealed carry permit, or maybe even haven't had formal training, but they're very comfortable with firearms. So they do need to get their permit. And then if somebody hasn't had formal training, we actually do want them to get basics. And by basics, I mean something more thorough than a concealed carry permit class, because Faster is not a beginner's course. In Ohio, they actually require a full day class called Foundations before they go to Faster, because and we're just not there yet. We're covering all the people who need to carry first, but the concept is the same. it's not a beginner course. We don't want folks coming to class that don't have basics of grip and stance and safety and those kind of things, because we're often running when they get there on some more advanced techniques. So I'd say that one. And the authorization of their school board, obviously. And we also do leave some space in class for a couple of folks. One would be a church security team. So lots of churches have armed security teams, which is awesome. Many churches can afford to send folks to really good training, and some can't. So we're happy to take members of church security teams who want to check out our training. And we've got a couple of folks coming through our next class that are from this tiny, tiny little church. And they asked for the scholarship the same as the teachers because they just don't have the budget for good training. And when I get asked the question, well, do you take churches as well as schools? And, I think, okay, well, my goal here is saving kids' lives. Just because they're in that building, not this building, these children are as valuable to us. And so, of course, so I make room for some churches. The other thing is occasionally I'll get a request from just an ordinary citizen who takes a lot of classes and says, I'd like to learn alongside the teachers. And so I say, great, do you have $1,000? Because we raise money so that the school staff can go through on full scholarships. And so if onesie, twosie here and there, we can get a citizen through who wants to see this. That's part of my long-term strategy of developing, folks out there who are interested in supporting this program long-term. So we're not going away. We're going to be here for forever. And the need for scholarships is always going to be there.
That's awesome. So it sounds like the faster course is, you said it's 28 hours long. How long is that foundations course that students have to have completed?
Yeah, in Ohio, it's a full day, so I'm going to call it 8 hours. I haven't been to it or seen it, but my sense of it, just seeing how they talk about it in their communications, is that it sort of bridges that gap between what you learned in a basic pistol or a concealed carry through to what you're going to learn in faster. And it also kind of level sets folks a little bit. If you've gotten your other training from different instructors, it sort of standardizes some language and makes sure when we're talking about grip and stance, do you have an isosceles person coming in and a weaver person, and let's just all get on the same page so that when we start faster, we're hitting the ground running.
That's awesome. How many rounds are we looking to? So if we took that class, what's the round count for it?
Yes, and you can come through as a journalist, and I'll trade you some articles for it. 800 to 1,000 rounds over the 3 days. We bring lots of Band-Aids, a range first aid kit, obviously, but we go through Band-Aids. People get hot spots on their fingers and that sort of thing. And it does matter what gun you're shooting with 800 to 1,000 rounds, right? Some people carry something smaller than they really want to shoot 1,000 rounds through in 3 days. So, but yeah, it's the feedback we've gotten has been spectacular. So,
real quick on guns, how often do guns fail, and what is the notorious gun for that class? That's the gun that somebody shows up with, and you're like, that's the gun that's gonna, by the end of 400 rounds in, we're gonna be looking at getting this guy another gun.
Yeah, we haven't had any notorious yet. They may have in Ohio because they're probably going to be close to 2,000 students now at the end of this summer over 6 years. We'll be going into class number 4 in August. So I have less experience we haven't had notorious. What's interesting is the range that we have right now. So we are renting a law enforcement range, which I love because we've got most of our county sheriffs here in Colorado are very supportive of this policy. And the Adams County Sheriff in Adams County is just a little bit north and west of Denver International Airport for those folks who know where that is. But they have this really great training facility out there that, they do academies in and that sort of thing. They've got a simulator, 2 covered ranges. And for anybody who has spent 3 days in the hot summer at a range, that a covered range is a huge lifestyle difference. Indoor plumbing, those sorts of comforts. But also one of the the guys that runs the range acts as an armorer. And so here and there, when folks have had a little bit of problem with a magazine or something like that, it's like, hey, let's see if Gabe can take a look at it. And that's been a real blessing for us. So, but I'll keep an eye out for Notorious. Are you guys, do you run into Notorious?
Ours tend to be the common gun. It's the Kimber 1911. Okay. We had one, maybe two this last class that broke the streak, and they were able to go through. And we only shoot 100 rounds, and they were able to make it through the 100 rounds without any issues. But up until that point, without fail, anytime a Kimber was in class, there was some issue with it. Where that student was going to the backup gun or using one of ours. Glocks are popular, and they run just fine. But yeah, it's the Kimber 1911. And Andy was telling me, Andy, what were you telling me about the Kimbers? They just went through a QC check or something like that.
They did. So from what I heard from a popular gun store here in Albuquerque, what's up to Walter, by the way, and BMC Tactical, great business. We were talking about this exact same thing a couple weeks ago, and he was saying that from 2016 on, that they've actually changed the Kimbers. They've done a lot better QC. And the one way you can tell on the Kimbers that are coming out is the top of the slide is milled flat. And he said when you see those are generally the newer Kimbers, and they're just a lot better quality firearms. So I actually looked for that, and we did have one on the range this last class. So I was interested to see how it did, and it did. It ran fine. Talking about guns and stuff, a couple questions for you. So can they carry whatever firearm they want per the school, or is there a mandated selection choice, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's we're very locally controlled here in Colorado, so it's really up to the school and how they're going to administer it. So I've had everything from whatever you have, it's up to you to keep it clean and get all your stuff for it, and you can carry. There have been some school districts that are more formalized about it, and they say we want everybody having a Glock 43, and we're going to have this sort of holster, and we're getting all the same ammo and that kind of thing. So we see that range. However they're handling it in their school district, we'll train them. But we do talk about it in class because I might have somebody in class that in class 1 this year, we had a school district. They are one building K through 12 in a rural area, and they have 7 defenders, armed defenders, and they're going into their 6th year. And I say, God help the terrorists that picked that school. So they've learned a lot over those years. And so they're sitting next to a school that the school board just authorized, and they're going to start carrying in the fall. And so having these conversations, even though we don't care, the program doesn't care, it's great for us to have these conversations, because you'll have a superintendent saying, okay, well, we haven't even decided yet if we're going to standardize or everybody's going to bring their own, help me understand. And you see breaks and lunch, you see those kind of conversations happening where they're learning from one another. So there's really no standard, and I'm okay with that. I don't actually want the state of Colorado, the legislature, coming in and butting in and deciding it knows best. I like across the board, whether we're talking about armed staff or not, I like decisions made as close as possible to the people. So it seems to be working fine.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I'm the same way. I'm not 100% on standardizing everything, but at the same time, I think community-wise, maybe a standard as to what everybody's going to carry, especially like an ammo choice. Because, the reality is a lot of us as firearms owners, the saying goes, we don't know what we don't know. So a lot of times, a lot of myths we hear and a lot of expectations that we think are correct can be conversely very wrong. So I think some kind of standard, I think that's kind of not a bad idea when it comes to an individual school. What other training tools do you guys use? So do you guys use cert pistols when you actually go into the drills as far as in the school and stuff? How do you utilize that?
Yeah. So within the faster class itself, we've, there's so many things that they do, from, positional shooting, shooting on the move, all different kind of stuff that they're going to have to use. when we get into the force on force scenario, we use airsoft pistols for that. And we take them through some really realistic stuff. And it's interesting, since so many people have Fitbits or Apple Watches with their heart rate, even though they know this is a drill, they know it's practice, they know it's role play. The instructors always say, who has a heart rate monitor, take a look, tell me what it says. Because I know I'm getting a little far afield from your question, but it's really important for them to see how they are reacting differently when their heart rate goes up. That's because what we're doing in training is just, a smidge of what would happen if the worst happened at their school. So, but yeah, we take them through lots of stuff. That what's interesting that I have gotten, we do a survey, a Google survey after each class, so that we want to continue to get better. Some of it's for me running the program, some of it's for the instructors, and we've been tweaking every class a little bit based on some really great feedback. But what we keep consistently hearing, and this just tells me that we hired the absolute right instructors. I keep hearing something like, I take X number of training sessions a year, or this, I've been taking training classes like this for 15 years or whatever. I learned more in one day than I've learned in my other classes. Wow. And so, and good, because these are people that we are sending out there to protect our children and our grandchildren. We want you to learn a whole bunch here. So we've just assembled a great crew of people.
That's great. Yeah, I always like to hear when we're using, like an airsoft gun, stuff like that, because you actually get that reaction feeling of that hurts like a son of a gun.
Yes, exactly.
You get a little bit of blowback action, in which all those things, it increases the heart rate, because we do force on force with our other co-host Judson, and it hurts. It hurts like heck. And when you're about to go into a scenario and there's a good chance you're going to get hit 5 or 6 or 20 times with airsoft, your adrenaline's already up a little bit high, because it's like, crap, I got to get shot again, and it hurts and it sucks.
Yeah.
So,
and there's also this other thing when you're taking the class along with maybe you're a teacher and your principal is here.
Yeah.
So there's like a performance anxiety that you want to have demonstrated, good skills in front of your boss. Maybe you have to shoot your boss in the force on force scenario. Maybe he's the bad guy. So there's that kind of adrenaline too. And even with the qualification, when we do the post qual, it's interesting, because if you're standing right next to your boss on the line, there's some performance anxiety there, and fine. We're fine with that. We're not trying to make it easy and cushy on people, because whatever stress you're having right now is nothing compared to if you have to stop an active killer in your school.
For sure.
Talk to us about your instructors. You said they're all law enforcement. Are those local instructors? Or are you bringing them in from Ohio? And what are some of the things that they focus on in that class?
Yeah, so great question. So class 1, we actually did have the Ohio instructors come out to certify our Colorado guys. I looked long and hard to find the right people, because I was interested not just in people who are good instructors, but there's something to this active duty law enforcement, because there's so many people who say, well, cops aren't in favor of armed school staff. Okay, I have 4 who are. So let's just start there. But yeah, so they're local. So last year when the Ohio guys came, so midway, and they sort of co-taught the class. Midway through day 1, I went to the lead Ohio instructor and I said, so what do you think of the guys that we hired? And he said, oh, they're better than us. I said, okay, good. And I like the active duty angle, because they learned something yesterday at work. They had a call last night. One runs an academy. 2 are on the street back and have rotated back to patrol. One is a commander. And 2 of them are in SWAT leadership right now. The other 2 have had previous rotations in SWAT. One was a responder to a high school shooting here in Colorado. One was a day 2 responder to the Aurora Theater shooting, and they've seen stuff. I mean, these are people who, after Sandy Hook, started training teachers on their own and their training companies. They all have kids in school, like they feel this, and they all work really great together. I would trust any of them to lead the 3 days if any of the others were gone. So they're just really great guys. Talking about guns earlier, one competes with Glock and one competes with SIG. And so there's always this SIG Glock fun thing that goes on for 3 days. That's pretty hilarious, actually. So, but we've sort of settled into who teaches what. But like I say, any of them could really teach any of the sections. They're just now that you mentioned, Andy, coming out to a class, I'd love to have you come out and see it and report on it. That would be a lot of fun to have one or both of you guys out.
Yeah, we'd love to do that. That's something, we were talking about recently, I'm sure you've gotten it as well. It's anytime we're talking about allowing teachers to be armed in the classroom, it's like, well, the counter argument for that is like, well, our side is forcing guns on teachers. And they're like, we're teachers, or they're not, that's not their job. That's not what they want to do. And for us, it's like, well, just allow them. The ones that want to will, the ones that don't won't. Right. And right. So what do you look like? Who is your student? What type of teacher is coming out to take this class?
All of them. So, and I say that half jokingly, but here in Colorado, about 9% of our adult population has a concealed carry permit. And outside of school, we look like all kinds of us, from the 21-year-old to, I'm a grandma these days, and to, people in their 70s or what have you. So we look like everything, and that's outside of school. So when you get inside school, it's the same thing, because they're just a cross section. So like I said, we've had everybody from, the person who's retiring in a couple of years, to we had a first-year agriculture teacher. Our most recent class, I had a guy call me from a community college, and he said, do you take people from colleges? And here in Colorado, there's no prohibition to carrying. You can just carry, but it's a rural community college. The security guy said, hey, can you, whoever wants to carry, please carry, because we're rural, we're a target. And so he said, can I come through your class? And I said, sure, because, Virginia Tech was a thing and those children were valuable. So come on through. So that was kind of cool. And he had questions about concealed carrying on horseback. If anybody had any different tips for horseback, I'll think about that. Right. So they look like everybody. And, we've got suburban charter school teams that have come through, lots of rural teams that have come through. The rural folks, for the most part, grew up with guns. And the rest are kind of a mix when they're not rural. But everybody comes through with a passion for saving kids. When we do our intro in the morning, and, why are you doing this? You hear things like, I would die to protect my kids. This is a very common thing. I would die to protect my kids, but I know the killer wants to kill me so he can kill more kids, and I can't let that happen. I mean, just going through the first hour of intro, it gives you a reverence for the people who come through these classes, for the heroes that they are. And I don't have teachers in my family. We're kind of, law enforcement, business, military, and no teachers. And I'm like, oh my God, these people are heroes. They're like, everybody says teachers are great people. I just didn't know that before from personal experience, but they're amazing human beings is what they are.
Yeah, that's great. I just you saying that alone, kind of gave me the chills, just thinking about these people that would be willing to go in there and die for these children that are they're honestly, they're there as much, if not more, than the parents are, so that's huge. Right. When they say, I would die for my kids, they mean it, in my opinion. Yeah.
And I'm going to turn on a light because we're having a storm coming through.
Sure.
But they call them my kids.
Right.
That's how they refer to them, my kids. And they would die to protect them. And here's the thing that you hear a lot of people saying, well, teachers can't do this, they can't do that. Guess what? They're already making a decision by putting their body in front of bullets and saving children with their body, because that's all they have. And so for people who, and this is sort of on that anti side, for people who say things like that, like you can't expect a teacher to go running to the sound of guns, really, because they're doing it right now, but with nothing. And I look at this from the self-defense aspect for the teachers as well. They've got a tough job. Are we really asking them to run toward the sound of guns with nothing, just their body or a stapler or a fire extinguisher? To face an armed madman, are we asking them to do that? Go die for your kids? We don't do that in any other profession. We at least equip cops with firearms. So it's life-changing. When I went to the Ohio class in 2016, they said, oh, you should see what we're doing. You can bring it to Colorado. And I came back an absolute changed person. I was a woman possessed to get this done here in Colorado. How do we not do this?
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. There's sorry, Jeremy, I cut you off. Yeah, there's this one state now that they're arming the kids with, or the teachers with small bats. And it's like, what are you doing? It's just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
So when you talk about the Ohio classes and stuff, let's go back to the beginning really quick. What made you want to do this? What inspired you? Who are the people that helped you? And I think you mentioned it before, but who are the people that helped you get this thing going in Colorado? Because I think it's amazing. And I wish we had the ability to take yourself and these actual teachers and start getting them on mainstream media to say, look, we are the teachers that are willing to fight for our kids. So tell me a little bit more about the background and what started you to do.
Yeah. So back in 2013, we had some recalls here in Southern Colorado where we recalled some state senators over their gun control votes. And one of them was here in my media market in Colorado Springs. And so I was the face and name and voice and all that stuff on the TV commercials. So I became a minor local public figure with trying to do these recalls. So I did some national media, and Sean Maloney, who you guys might know from Buckeye Firearms, he saw me on one of my national appearances and called the producer and said, how do we help her? So Buckeye Firearms self-deployed, I think it was like 8 people or something like that, came out here for the last 10 days of the election. They walked, they called, they went to gun shows and ranges, and they were awesome. We didn't win. One of the recalls, we didn't win by more than like 300 votes. So I'm so grateful for them. So Linda Walker, one of the folks from Ohio, said, you guys lost your gun rights because you don't have a good statewide pro-gun organization. So, and she decided it should be me to do it. So, fast forward, I started Coloradans for Civil Liberties. Our tagline is restoring freedom one round at a time, because we have a 15 round limitation right now in Colorado. So now I had an organization. And so they said, now that you have an organization, come see what we're doing with Faster. And the reason that an organization is important is somebody has to go do the work of talking to school boards and parent groups and raising money and all that kind of stuff. If it's just a training company, they want to train, but they don't necessarily want to do all that other stuff. And it's part of the whole package. So I went, they invited me back to a class. I actually ran into Judson at the class he was filming it. And I was blown away. I came back and wrote an article called Keeping Kids Safe in a Broken World. And it was from an interview with a teacher there. And she said, look, it's a broken world. Hoping isn't going to keep a deranged madman from killing our kids. But I'm trained, I'm a defender, I can save them. And I was like, holy crap. So I came back. My organization is under the umbrella of the Independence Institute, which is a free market think tank here in Colorado that has a Second Amendment Policy Center, Dave Kopel. A lot of folks know Dave Kopel and his Second Amendment work. And I went back to my co-conspirator there, Amy Cook, and I said, dude, we got to do this. And she, same as you, got the chills. And she said, okay, what do we have to do? So we've been, raising money and putting on classes. And that's what it takes in other states is somebody has to run it. There has to be some crazy yahoo like me who's not thinking as the top priority, how do I make money from this? Because it's not a moneymaker for startups. I mean, there's just way too much to do. So I completely credit Buckeye Firearms Association and Foundation. Sean Maloney was absolutely the biggest, took the interest in getting this done and was one of the folks that came out for our first class and helped out. Plus he can lift heavy things, which is always helpful.
That's awesome. So you mentioned, you mentioned teachers have to be authorized. I know we touched on it earlier on in the show. I wanted to get your thoughts on what that process looks like. What does a teacher have to do in Colorado to be authorized by their school district to carry a gun?
Yeah, so the legal process is that a resolution that gets passed by the school board in an executive session, and they say, Joe Smith is authorized to carry. They have a contract with Joe Smith, and they say, in addition to your job as janitor, you are also part of the security team for an additional $1 a year. Something like that. But here's how the process might look. And I gather this information at classes. I always talk to them about how it went. And for the most part, it looks something like they've had internal discussions. They've decided that they want to go that route to add armed staff. The school board's going to take action, or they just took action. And so the super might send out an email and say, we've decided to do this. If you would like to volunteer, keyword volunteer, come see me privately. And then he or she can take a look at all the people who volunteered, and then they can make decisions as a board and as a group of administrators who the right people are. And so sometimes we hear, it can't be Mrs. So-and-so. I literally heard this from a school. It can't be Mrs. So-and-so because she once threw a stapler at a kid. Okay, if we all know that, then she's not going to be one of the authorized people, even if she volunteers. So it's very locally selected. And I like that because if then somebody goes through a situation, has a mental problem, or they're going to know it locally. As opposed to saying at the state level, it can only be these people or what have you. And with nothing local. I want the local people making those decisions. It's worked very well for 15 years. Awesome.
That makes sense. Yeah, because that's the other thing, right? That people, anti-gunners or people that are worried, they'll say, well, what if a teacher loses their mind? And my argument has been, what's in place to stop them from losing their mind and doing that anyways?
Right. And at least we'll have other armed staff around if they lose their mind. At least somebody else is armed, like in the rest of the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. What does the fundraising efforts look like? So how much, teachers, I'm assuming teachers are receive the training for free. Is that correct?
Yeah. So here's how we structure it. So our cost on the class, and at some point I'm going to figure out how to make money on it. But right now our cost on the class is about $1,000 a person. We fundraise to make sure that anybody who wants to go through isn't stopped from going through due to cost considerations. We have these tiny little schools that they just don't have the budget. So I'd say probably 80% of our folks go through at a full scholarship. Some schools say, hey, we can use some of our training budget for this. And some say $500 and some say we can afford $100 per person. Great. It just defrays for us. So that's part of what I do is I fundraise. And we've had some fun this year getting connected with people who love this mission like we do. Our most recent, and he has outed himself as a donor, so I can talk about him because we don't discuss our donors, but he started it. 1776 Roofing. It's a big roofing company here in Colorado on the Front Range, and veteran owned. Their promotion is get a roof, get a gun. they know exactly who their customer is, right? And they know that there's certain people who will never come buy a roof from them, and they're okay with that. So I've been talking to him for about the last 6 months. He says, I love what you're doing. How do we incorporate your program into what we're doing? So we toyed around with, get a roof, get a gun for a teacher, different things like that were all complicated. And what we settled on was, you get a roof, get a gun, and part of his profits, part of James Webb's profits, go to Faster. And he's not talking about the amount, so I won't, but it's something that if we continue a long-term relationship with him, which I believe we will, it'll fund a class a year for us. And that's a big deal. That's a lot of money I don't have to go out and individually raise. So we're hopeful that we make some other connections like that with folks. We just talked to, again, another person who's outed himself, an organization called Bullets Both Ways. And meaning if bullets are coming one way, they should be coming the other way, right? And his deal is he is merchandising Bullets Both Ways hats and T-shirts and stuff like that. And a part of his proceeds are going to go to Faster. So I like setting up that sort of auto pay, kind of thing where it's not begging every day, which I still do because, we need to fundraise. We're not there yet. So, but I'm honored to do that because again, these are people who would die for our children, and they deserve the best training out there. I want them to have that. And if I have to raise money for that, then I will. The other thing is that it removes that objection that we hear sometimes from people who are opposed to the policy. They've got their whole list of what's all wrong with it, including they have a lot of talking points that are exactly the same wherever I go. But it's along the lines of our teachers are buying school supplies from their pocket. How are these schools going to afford this? No problem. I'm fundraising for that. So we're taking that objection away. While at some point, maybe in the future, the state of Colorado says, oh, those are state employees and they work in state buildings and this is a normal part of their job. Of course, training money should be available for that. But we're not waiting around for that. We're getting them trained because the next school shooting could happen at any time, and we're not waiting. So,
yeah, that's awesome. And that's I don't think people realize that it's we can sit here and go back and forth on legislation and what other words we can put on paper to stop the next psychopath from walking into a school. But it's like, hey, realistically, that person probably already has his guns, and that person probably already has thought about it, and he's planning it, right? And he's waited for that moment. So what's the quickest thing that we can do? And that's allowing these people that would run towards that gunfire, put themselves, the gym teacher that's going to put himself between that bad guy and students, right? Knowing full well that once he hits the deck, he can't do anything else for him. Mm-hmm. Allowing them to have that option and give them the tools, right? And that's the other thing. Well, the schools can't afford it. We can't afford books and computers. And it's like, guys, you realize most of these teachers, right, outside, if they didn't have scholarship, they would still come and pay the $1,000 or however much it costs to do that because they know what's at stake.
They've done their best. They've done their best to get training. And there are, there's nothing magical about what we're doing. It's stuff that SWAT guys learn on how to stop an active killer. It's out there. But we think that what we have is a step above any other training company because of the fact that we have active duty law enforcement guys that train SWAT guys. That's a big deal. And so we want them to have not just good enough. We want them to have the best because it's about saving kids and saving their fellow school staffers. It's not just kids that die in these things, but you're exactly right. The next school shooter's out there. He probably already has his gun, explosives, plan, is fantasizing about it. I mean, these are sick people. They're out there. What are we going to do about it? Legislation isn't going to fix it. You can harden your schools only so much. And weapons and drugs get smuggled into prisons, for goodness sakes. If they want to, they're going to get a gun in school, regardless of how we set it up.
So, we had a discussion after one of the last school shootings. We had a roundtable discussion here. And it was mostly some local folks, but we had some guys from across the country on as well. And when we were talking about training, for me, there are going to be two types of responders, armed responders in that school setting. And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but in my head, my thought is you're going to have the teacher that's going to barricade in place, right? They're going to lock the door. They're going to barricade it. They're going to have their kids in the safest corner of the room. And then the person that breaches that locked door, right, if it's not a first responder, is going to receive their rounds, right? They're going to send rounds in that direction. So it's going to be that fatal funnel. And then you're going to have the teachers, those teachers that we see in every mass shooting, every school shooting, right? It's the principal or the assistant principal. It's the gym teacher that runs towards the gunfire. Are you seeing different types, or is that a conversation that you're having with your students? And what is their plan going to be, right? If something happens, if they hear gunshots on the other side of their hallway, are they going to seek that out, or are they going to barricade in place?
Yeah, and there's lots of discussion about that from a tactical standpoint. What we know is that about 60% of the folks that come through our class, and these are my numbers and Ohio numbers, it's very consistent, 60% are administrators, 40% are teachers. So from a tactical standpoint, that means that more of them are not tied to a classroom. There's also a difference if you are a kindergarten teacher or if you're a high school teacher. Because if things are going down and there are shots being fired, a high school teacher might be able to say, you do this, you barricade, you get the fire extinguisher, you be ready to fight if anybody comes in this room. I got to go stop this guy. So there are differences, and every situation is going to be different. You could have every defender not in a class because it's carpool lane time. Nobody's in a class. Everybody's free. And that's why, they do after class, they go back and they do drills in their school. Where are our classrooms? Where would we be at fifth period? Where would we be right after school? Where would we be? What do our fire drills look like? We've seen a lot of that in school shootings lately, right? Are we lining kids up to make them easy targets? So there's lots of stuff going on like that.
Well, so I have a bunch of questions, and I know we probably don't have the time, but I'm going to give you a couple, and maybe you can answer them all in one question. So what does it look like for future training for the teachers after they've already gone through this training? Is there future training possibilities? What about the kids? Do the kids get involved in some kind of drills later on down the road so they understand what the teachers' jobs are going to be and what they know what to expect? And then finally, with that question, and like I said, there's three here. So I've heard you say a couple times where you say the teachers are going to run into the gunfire. They're going to run in after this shooter. So are they being taught to actually go after the shooter, or are they taught to barricade in place and defend as needed? How does that work?
Yeah, and that's a yes in both. Let me talk about the students' involvement first. The students don't know who the teachers are who are armed. So in school to school, at least the ARM team always knows who one another is. They train together. They do have a requirement for ongoing training and a requirement for annual recertification. I haven't talked to anybody who doesn't do more than they're supposed to because they take their jobs really seriously. But back to the kids, they shouldn't know who the teachers are. So sometimes it's publicly known that this school has armed staff. So Bennett School District up by Denver International Airport, it's a little bit rural. They have big signs in their parking lot that say we have armed staff, but they don't talk about who their armed staff is. So students know we have armed staff. They still do their lockdown drills or shelter in place, all that stuff. They still do those drills, but they're not interacting with the armed staff as armed staff. But the armed staff coordinate with each other and drill separately. So as far as barricading versus going toward the sound of where the bad guy is, if you have children to protect, and there's a lot of situational stuff, but I'm going to just give a general. Okay, if you have children to protect that need a grown-up there to protect them, then you stay there. If you are the janitor, the coach, the principal, not in charge of people, wherever the sound of the guns is, children are dying. That's what that means. So the dying has to stop. So if you're not with children in a classroom that need to be protected, then you have to consider yourself as part of the bigger with children, and you got to go protect those kids. So it's very different than like a military assault kind of feel. It's much, much closer to a SWAT team style of finding and stopping the killer. So as law enforcement training changed after Columbine, we no longer do perimeters and wait for the negotiators to get there and that sort of thing. It's that sort of training. You got to go stop that killer because with every shot, somebody's potentially dying, and you've got to stop that.
Gotcha. It was a good thing, really quick, for you to say that the teachers are always willing to do more than they should, because that's important. So I'm going to pick on police a little bit. So there's a small group of police, and this is my opinion only. There's a small group of police officers that train, and they train with their firearms, and their goal is to use these firearms and to know them well. And I think there's an honest group, and my opinion, probably a majority, where a lot of these police officers, where they go, they qualify there once in a year, and they probably never use their handgun again. And so I hope that these teachers understand, and I'm sure you guys talk about this, being that you have SWAT guys in there, because those are the guys that are hardcore about wanting to know their firearms, because that's the requirement. That these teachers understand the perishable skill deal, that look, just because we trained you once doesn't mean you're good to go for the next 20 years. You know what I mean? Yeah.
We do talk about that a lot. And what's I think convenient for the teachers is that 3 of our guys have their own training companies within the kind of the Denver metro area. So I know that this guy that I just spent 3 days with, he has other classes that I can take, even in excess of what they have to do. But as I said before, by and large, these are people who have a higher than average level of firearms experience. It's the thing that made them volunteer and say, pick me to defend children. So they need less convincing than the average Joe, I think. And the fact that it's their kids, saving kids is at stake. It's it has a different feel, and makes me just feel so honored to know these people, and that I get to work alongside them and that sort of thing. So they're amazing people who volunteer for this duty.
That's awesome. Yeah. Students that self-select are, are outside of that norm. It's not like in New Mexico, if you want to get a concealed carry license, you have to take 15 hours of training. So that by and large, they get their 15 hours of training and they're done with it, but it's the students, like you said, that realize what's really at stake, that they're the ones that are coming back and taking the follow-up training. Right. I had something else, since we're talking about, school shootings and what's at stake. So one of the other big counter arguments to allowing people to be armed on school is, well, when police show up, if you have a gun, you're going to get shot. Can you talk to us a little bit about our side, like the pro self-defense side of it, being your own first responder, and what that really looks like, right? Like the teachers, right? In Colorado, if there's a protector there, they're running towards the gunfire. So how does that look for the police response?
Yeah, so this is probably the number one question we get from a community concern standpoint. And I put this in the bucket of what ifs. And even though the what ifs almost never happen, we train around them anyway. And the link up with law enforcement is one of the most potentially dangerous parts of it. After somebody shooting at you, a bad guy in a school. But we do train a lot around that. We don't telegraph all of our tactics for obvious reasons. We don't want bad guys to be able to blend in and look like a good guy, so we don't talk about all that publicly. But we do talk about a lot of techniques to make sure that you're identified as the good guy. Now, there's a couple of other things to consider here. These things are almost always over before law enforcement gets there. We train them that if they have a firearm in their hand, it is their job to not get shot by the cops. That means when you are done stopping the threat, you reholster flat out. You can't have a gun pointed at other people or you will look like a threat. So they know it's their job not to get shot by law enforcement. And then our SWAT guys that are the ones teaching it, they don't want to shoot an innocent person either. So they're exactly the right people to teach this. And they talk about how a bad guy and good guy look different. If you are applying a tourniquet to somebody, even if you are seen with a firearm, you're probably a good guy. All those kind of things. So, and the bad guy looks really different because he's shooting children. So there's lots of things in there where we're not concerned about them happening because they don't happen a lot. However, we do a lot of training around it because one innocent life lost is not acceptable.
My blunt answer has been, if you're in a classroom that's getting shot and you present your handgun and you stop that threat, and then half a second later, SWAT busts through the door and puts a couple rounds in you, that's probably what the likely outcome was going to be. And that's probably not the most politically correct way to put it. But I mean, if you think about it, if I'm in an active shooter situation and SWAT happens to enter this situation a half a second or a second later before I can get the gun away, that bad guy was probably going to take me out.
Right.
So what about, are the law enforcement officers aware in the cities that these armed teachers are, and do they, I'm sure they have some kind of planning around that, but what does that look like for those folks?
Yeah, great question. So we talk about this, that link up with law enforcement ahead of time. So you're not having your first link up in the heat of a gun battle. Everybody has already had the thought before they hit the class that, hey, we have armed staff here, I should alert my sheriff. So they've talked about it. They have, the deputies come through, the officers come through, have a private coffee with folks, that sort of thing. It's never 100% because if you have a school shooting, they're rolling everybody from every agency. So it's never 100% that you're going to know everybody, but it's always very helpful. Because, if you think about it this way, if the staffers don't stop the bad guy, then there is going to be some sort of a handoff, because when law enforcement gets there, they're in charge. The armed staff are no longer in charge. And we very clearly train that. So creating that understanding with your local law enforcement agency is very important. We talk a lot about it. Folks share with each other what their conversations have been with their local chief or sheriff, because it just gives people lots of ideas to learn more. But almost everybody, like I say, has already talked to their local law enforcement without being told to do so. I think it's part of taking their job really seriously.
That makes sense. Man, I'd love to. When is your next training?
Yeah, so our next training, and let me just tell folks where they can find out more information. They can go to fastercolorado.com. And FASTER is an acronym. You won't remember what it stands for, so I won't even say it. But I like the word because it implies that urgency. The faster you stop the killer, the faster you stop the bleeding, the fewer people die. So fastercolorado.com. The dates for our next class, it's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, August 10, 11, and 12. We've got, I think, 7 spots left in it. And in our last class, Stephen Gutowski from the Washington Free Beacon came through. He's a firearms instructor, just basic pistol. And he came through as a journalist, but he went through the whole thing, qualified. He's actually a really good shooter. And wrote some great stories out of it that I think help connect ordinary people to it. Why one of the stories was just on the teachers and why they do this. And that's a story that has to be told. So, we're happy to entertain, keeping a spot or two open for journalists who will help educate folks on why this is the future. The trend is to have armed good guys protecting our children. And in many instances, that doesn't mean a school resource officer because they can't afford it, or it means armed staff in addition to a school resource officer because it's just too dang much territory for an SRO to cover by him or herself.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'd love to get I feel like we can go on for another hour. There's a whole side of medical and force on force. I'm sure we haven't talked to or talked about. So I'd love to, hopefully after the next class, get you on and a couple of students and instructors and see if we can do maybe a longer segment. Because this is, I think it's critically important, right? The world isn't getting any safer out there. Our schools definitely aren't getting any safer.
Right.
And then the risks that our students and our teachers and faculty members are facing, they're just, they're always going to be there. So what parting advice do you have for our listeners?
So for parents, grandparents, voters, constituents, find out what your school district is doing. Regardless of what state you're in, there are 32 states that have some lawful process to allow armed staff in school. There are California went backwards. Everybody else is going in the right direction. So ask your school board members if you are in one of those school districts where they say, no way, no how, we're never doing that. Start finding who's going to run against them because elections have consequences, and the incentive program for politicians is to get reelected. And if they think they're not going to get reelected because they're unwilling to consider this, they might change their tune. So that would be my parting advice. Find out what's going on in your school districts. And if you're in a state that isn't Colorado and isn't Ohio, the folks in Ohio are very, very, very helpful with states that want to roll out a whole program like we've done here in Colorado. And we're the first full rollout state. Reach out to Faster Saves Lives in Ohio, or reach out to me. In fact, it's fastersaveslives.org, or to reach out to me and we'll get you connected. If you want to do this in your state, I've done a lot of cool things professionally. I've never done anything that's this important, and people involved in it just feel that way about it. It's about saving lives.
Yeah, that's great. We so here in Albuquerque, our sister city next to us is Rio Rancho, and we've seen some media come out where they're actually considering arming their teachers too. So we're hoping that comes along. I do have a couple listener questions that popped up. Have you worked with any other programs or state programs to better improve your program?
So as far as other training programs?
Right. So as instructors and stuff, we always look to be better and do more things and learn better.
Sure.
So learn better. That was a good one. So is there anything that you guys utilize to where you increase your program to make it better through other state programs?
Yeah. So I'll give you two sides of it. So from a program standpoint, I work with Ohio. I will talk to any state that's doing something and find out more about what they're doing. So from a program standpoint, outreach, media, fundraising, we all can help each other. From a instructor standpoint, these are guys who are always learning. And so they will take any feedback, obviously, but they also are always going to schools. They're teaching all the time, going to classes in Colorado and outside of Colorado. So if folks have advice that they'd like to send our way, if there are other instructors from out of state that would like to, come through and observe the program, we'd be happy to have folks.
Awesome. One thing I learned from, we've talked about Sean Maloney and Judson and yourself, and it's been a great benefit for Jeremy and myself that we've learned great instructors and great people like yourselves. And I have to add another one, which is Tim Knight, who's an NRA board member, also was involved in the Colorado recalls as well. And he always has taught me every time I've talked to him, the whole student of the gun thought, always be a student of the gun. And I say this in class, I thank all of our students, because as I'm standing up here being an instructor and I'm teaching you, I'm also a student too, because I learn from each and every one of those people that are in class. And I think that's very important for us instructors, even as SWAT guys. And it's great to see them to be able to go from SWAT to go to these teachers that are completely almost black and white different from what they do to their lifestyles, which is amazing. Yeah. So the second question I have is medical training. And as Jeremy said, we got to wrap up soon because we're going a little bit long, but how much of your class is hands-on medical training? How much hands-on part of this course is it? How many hours?
Yeah, so between the actual class portion and then we use the skills in our scenarios, so call it 4 to 5 hours, depending on who's doing what. But that portion is trained by paramedics who train law enforcement in TCCC. And then same as Ohio, we send them home with a trauma kit. So it's a pretty significant portion, and it's humbling because they see stuff that they're not going to see. And, this isn't a boo-boo that needs a Band-Aid. This is some pretty serious stuff. So it's very sobering for them to see what they might be dealing with.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think I'm taking a medical class in August. I don't know. I got to check my calendar and stuff, but I know we're hosting a medical course down here in August. Andy, you're probably taking that. I got to see what's going on with the third kiddo that's on the way. So that one might decide to show up early. Excuse me. Andy, what parting advice do you have for our listeners?
My parting advice is, well, first of all, I got to say this was a very good and enlightening podcast. So thanks for coming on with us. I really appreciate it. And there was some questions that they were leading questions, and she did great on them, because a lot of the questions are kind of myth-based and a lot of questions that normal everyday citizens are going to ask. So you knocked that out of the park. Thank you for that. The final thing is that if you're on this podcast, start talking to your children that are in school. Start asking their questions about what their teachers think, because you might get a surprise. I've always done that to my daughter just to see what her teachers thought and how that are led. I've said this on another podcast. When she was in school, she was in a charter school, and they have all glass pane windows inside. Their rooms are all glass. And one of the things that they were being taught is when there's an active shooter, everybody line up against the wall. And I was like, that's not going to happen. Here's your direction. This is what you're going to do. And what's going to happen? You're going to get suspended after school. You know what I mean? So, yeah. Okay. So I think it's important for us as parents to talk to our children about this as well, to where they understand the details, because as you said, right now, as we speak, we can guarantee, and it's a sad fact, that there are people out there that are planning to do the next shooting. And it's very important for our children to understand that they have to be prepared for this as well. And it's a tough conversation, but it's one that we have to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And can I just say one last thing on the Faster Colorado website? And there's a couple of links there. One is for a frequently asked questions document, and another one is a busting the myths document. And because I was getting the same questions over and over, I figured lots of people had them. So I hand them out when I speak publicly, but folks can also, they're print friendly. So you can go in and print it out and take it to your school board meeting, that sort of thing. So some resources are there for you as well.
That's awesome. We definitely appreciate you coming on, and we hope that we can get you back on here with a couple of instructors and students. We're going to jump off of here, and then if you can hang out for a couple minutes just to do an after-action report of the after-action podcast, that would be great.
You bet.
We definitely appreciate everybody jumping on and listening. It looks like I had some audio issues over on Facebook. I'll get those cleared up and get this video shared. That way everybody can enjoy it, and then it will be published to iTunes and all the other podcast platforms here in a few days. Remember, it's your life, it's your safety and protection, it's your responsibility. Stay safe. Man, we really hope you enjoyed listening to that episode as much as we did interviewing and having our guests on. Be sure to share this with your friends and family and head over to patreon.com/afteractionproject. We'd love to have you on as a guest panelist, and be sure to check out those other rewards that we have for our Patreons.
If you're a recent graduate of a firearms-related training course and would like to join us on our show, or if you'd like us to review a specific firearm-related training course or instructor, shoot an email to show@afteractionproject.com. Remember to join a local firearms advocacy organization. As always, stay safe, shoot straight, and remember to secure your firearms so that unauthorized persons cannot gain access to them.